When we speak of civil liberties and civil rights, people are beginning to understand that the most fundamental of these is the right to work in our society. And what is occurring in Guyana is that the government is making political capital out of the indefensible position of one who is either unemployed or is very close to the line of being unemployed.
I want to say to you all, in no uncertain terms, that this government is disrespectful to black people. And if people disrespect you, you have a right to disrespect them.
I am saying now that we have started, now that we have come together, do not sleep. Don't let us go back quietly into the night. Protest must be the order of the day.
God-given rights. Hey. Liberation time come. Along a walk time come. Along a walk time come. Hey. Then I just want time. Liberate, that's not to deliver us. Liberate self-emancipation. Liberate. Liberate, 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 liberate. No more dictators. Liberate people's power. Liberate. 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 Freedom to one and all. Liberate, 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 liberate. Liberate.
We want to invite you to come into the march. Join us for the love
to the people.
Join the people.
Along a walk, along a walk, along a walk. Yeah. No more dictators. Power to the people. Power to the working classes. Awake, 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 awake. Wake your sisters. No more compressors. No more compressors. Long I walk, long I walk, long I walk, long I walk.
I want to tell you that some of the marchers were a very tender age, children of 8, 9, 10, and 12. Give them a special hand. At the other end of the pole, there were people like me, over 60, some a little more feeble than I, but brave at heart. And in the middle were the salt of the earth, those in their prime, who are custodians of all the energy of the revolution, which we have to fight for our freedom and well-being. Our program this afternoon is simple. The Patriotic Coalition called this march to get the people to take part in a fight to better our own conditions, the conditions of the people, to better these conditions in various ways. The coalition was formed because of the denial of the right to vote. And the right to vote does not mean going into a ballot place and scratching a paper. It also means the right to have those votes honestly counted. Today is the anniversary of Sharpeville. time they shot down scores of people in South Africa at the place of that name, representing an extreme form of denial of human rights. There, the struggle took a very bloody form of repression. It is not because our struggle here is not very bloody, except for a few.
Very good evening to you on a Monday evening, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. WPA Groundings today. WPA Groundings today. The voice of AUC Kwayana in the background speaking at Kitty Market Square in June of 1987. I was watching a program a few nights ago, an independence program on Globe Span, and Hamilton Green was one of the panelists. And he reported on that program that he went to a forum organized supposedly by the government or the PPP, one is not too sure, but he was invited, and they were celebrating this or observing the 70th anniversary of the first parliament in Guyana under universal adult suffrage. That was the election in 1953 of the United PPP. And I say the United PPP because I want to make a distinction between that PPP, which included Burnham, Jagan, Kwayana, Martin Carter, Rory Westmus, Janet Jagan, Ashton Chase, Clinton Wong, James Phillips Gay, Jane Phillips Gay, and J.P. Lachman Singh, among others. And the first government that was elected at those elections, the first 6 ministers were as follows. As follow. Chedi Jagan, J.P. Lachman Singh, Ashton Chase, Fobbs Burnham, Sidney King, I think I'm forgetting one, Jainarayan Singh. I think those were the 6 ministers. Of those 6 ministers, 2 of them are still alive, Ashton Chase and Sidney King, who is now AUC Kwayana. And Hamilton Green said he went to that event. And there were 6 PPP ministers there, and there were PPP speakers. And they only mentioned Ashton Chase. So they either killed Kwayana or didn't know that he's still alive. They never mentioned his name. This is Brother Hamilton Green is reporting that. And when I heard that, I remember in 1994, shortly after the PPP came to power, Mrs. Janet Jagan, she wrote a history of the PPP, and they had a forum and did not include Kwayana's name. I was a young upstart then, and there was a paper called the Caribbean Daylight in New York. And through that paper, I wrote a column asking Mrs. Jagan why she omitted Kwayana's name. Suffice to say, that was the last time that I was in Mrs. Jagan's good book. I got into a bad book after then. So it is what they have done 30 years later is the same thing. Write Kwayana out of history. Is that he was never part of the PPP. He was never part of that government as far as they're concerned. He was the Minister of Communication and Works. It was during that government that he made his famous statement, "This confounded nonsense must stop," addressing the governor who was meddling in his ministry. We were still a colony then, of course, and the governor felt that he could meddle, and Kwayana publicly said, "I will not stand for this confounded nonsense," and through folklore, it becomes, "This confounded nonsense must stop." But the PPP has over the years written Kwayana out of history. Kwayana wrote the party song for the PPP, which they still use. He was the most prolific writer in the party's newspaper, The Thunder. PPP members, Donald Ramatar and others who have been doing research, they call me all the time and tell me, "I found Kwayana this, I found UC wrote this in 1953, I found this, I found that. I found the poem by UC in 1953. He was the most prolific writer in the party newspaper. He was the assistant general secretary of the party. Mr. Jagan was the general secretary. Mr. Burnham was the chairman. Kwayana was the assistant general secretary. When the British came, Kwayana was one of those, along with Martin Carter, Ajroda Singh, and some of the others, but Carter and Kwayana were among those who were detained, jailed at Atkinson Airfield, which is now Timeri. And it was there that the mythology came into being. People said Kwayana had magical powers because he was supposed to be jailed at Timeri, but the governor was seeing him in his house. It was during that time when he and Martin Carter and others were imprisoned that Martin Carter wrote most of his poems of resistance. So you can't miss Kwayana in the early PPP, yet the PPP held a 70th anniversary and didn't mention him. I understand a senior PPP man has written a book and doesn't mention Kwayana in the book. He wrote about that period. I haven't read the book yet, and I understand he hasn't written. And when somebody asked him why Kwayana is not in the book, he said, his job is not to write about Kwayana, that's David Hines' job. His job is to write about Jagan. You know? That is why when you hear people like Ravi Dev and now a fella, I don't want to call his name because I don't want to give him too much prominence, when they're telling Black people that we must forget our history, what they're telling us is that we will write that history, write you out, and you must not correct that history. It's one of the problems they have with me. You know, I am not a trained historian, a trained political scientist, but part of the sub-field in politics is political history. And so I write political history. So a lot of times when you all hear me carrying on about what happened in the past, it's because I am partly trained as a political historian. And one of the things I learned from Walter Rodney is to use history as a tool in the struggle for liberation. And they call me now a memory warrior. Notice they call Henry Jeffrey a memory warrior too, and Vincent Alexander, and those of us who use history as a way to make sense of our present, using our past. Now they have silenced Guyana from the early history. The man who wrote the party song, who was Assistant General Secretary, who was one of the ministers, he wasn't a minor player, but they are so brazen. They write him out of history. So, according to the fellow who wrote the book, David Hines has to write about Guyana. So, it's people like myself who have to now write Guyana back in history. For those of you asking me, why did you play Guyana there? I played Guyana to remind Guyanese there is an Ayusi Guyana who has been around in Guyanese politics from as far back as 1945. 78 years. And in writing him out of history, they're writing out a large slice of Guyanese politics. This guy wrote the party song for the PPP, the PNC, the WPA. This fellow headed the largest Black organization that we have seen in Guyana in our history, ASCRA. This chap headed the land, what we call the old land reform scheme under Burnham, headed the committee that set up the cooperative bank, was head of the GMC, gave our cooperative republic the cooperative. He's the one that suggested to Mr. Burnham that our republic should be a cooperative republic. And I can go on and go on and on and on. He's probably Dr. Nigel Westmus, who collects all his writings, swears that he is the most prolific writer in Guyana, at least over the last 80 years. Writing on politics, writing on education, writing stories, writing poetry. Yet the PPP wants to write him out of history. And in writing him out of history, they want to write half of Guyana out of history. We're not going to let them do it. Tonight is WPA Groundings, so we're going to hear from the WPA. Takuma Ogun says, hey, good evening, Brother Takuma.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Hines and your viewers. Good evening.
And you heard me there reporting what Hamilton Green reported on a program that he went to, the writing of Guyana. Any comments on that? You know Guyana as long as I have known him, and you have known him organizationally probably longer than I did.
Yes, everything that you said is true, but I think the important point is that we have to recognize that there's a growing fascist mentality that is prevalent in the PPP, and it seems to have been prevalent even before recent times. It seems to be part of PPP's politics that once you and them fall out, okay, they use all the resources, okay, to wipe you out of history. But in terms of Guyana, this is not just war against Guyana as a person. Guyana represents in a profound way the African Guyanese community. And in trying to wipe Guyana out of history in the present context, very consciously of all the accusations, because this is not writing 10 years ago. You're writing the current context. To do that in the current context of activity is a manifestation of the deliberate policy of the PPP to engage in political genocide of African people. And that is what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with, we have long gone past the normal African Indian politics as reflected by Burnham and Jagon. And you know, we are into a new and different kind of PPP politics. You know, they call me a 3-man, a 5-man party. I used to call them, there's a 3-man party. You know, Jagdeo, Ali, and Nandalal. You know, there's a PPF being reduced to 3-man party. At least, you know, and those are the persons who shape the PPP policy, okay, as it unfold, at least after the death of Janet, Chedi and Janet. And and all three of them have little connection with the Guyanese struggle in any profound way. I don't think you could find anyone of them ever sitting in a police lockup for a minute. I can't even remember seeing anyone of them in any major protests. I don't even know the police ever put their hand on any one of them, even in a picket exercise. The point I'm making is that they have inherited the PPP's power and the power of the Indian people in a collective. They use that collective power to refashion the party and to use that to try to refashion the whole nation in a very racist, you know, and a deliberate way that is unprecedented in the country's history. And this is what this is a new challenge that faces politically, is not the old engagement. And I'm putting aside the oil factor. I'm telling you, I've been studying Jagdeo's rise in the political affair of the country. And I remember when he surfaced, and I have my first interaction with Jagdeo, as far as I could remember, it took place when a visiting African head of state came to the country, and they had a reception for him at the old Burnham residence on Vicinja Road there. And myself, Malcolm Rodriguez, and a couple other WPA persons were invited, and we were in the thing, and we put up a delegation aside of PPP people, and Jagdeo was there among them. And he made first, we're gonna see in the recognition handbook, you know, and that is the first political contact I had with Jagdeo. And you could say it was a friendly, fraternal engagement. I can say at the personal level, Jagdeo was vindictive to me. So I don't have no personal axe to grind with Jagdeo. To the extent that I have problems with Jagdeo is his politics. You know, he have evolved as one of the longest serving presidents in the country. He represents a major political party and so forth. And to the extent that I got problems with him, is political, not even personal. And I remember the WPA, when Jagdeo first became president, we were discussing it. And Koyana was very strong that, look, we got to give the young man a chance. He was delighted to know that a young man of a younger generation has emerged and has this responsibility to lead the nation. And I consciously remember I disagree. I argue the point that, you know, youth is not automatically will guarantee us good leadership. And in the complexity of Guyanese racial and political problems, you need people with political experience. And I didn't really buy into Jagdeo's leadership in a certain way. It wasn't personal. It was a political judgment. I say all this to say that the WPA, you know, has always, and Koyana in particular, in dealing with the Guyanese politics, have always tried to be as objective as possible. And just give another example quickly, then we can move back to where we want to go. I remember after the coalition came to power in 2015, Koyana visited soon after. And I was very concerned that there's an element in the equation that is not being addressed. And I couldn't really get nobody. I tried to engage people on what this victory means and to what extent the shift that we see in the Indian community that the AFC was able to, to bring, whether it is how long it will hold, and what are the factors influencing it in the context of the criminalization state and the fact that the Jagdeo have used the state to direct tremendous wealth to the Indian community. And my sense is the rebellion against the PPP and Jagdeo wasn't ideological. It was in a great way. A lot of Indians feel they're not beneficiary, okay, of the spoils that the other Indian elite is getting from, this transformation of so much wealth. And I had doubts as to whether that would hold for long. But I couldn't get nobody even to venture that discussion. And I tried to raise it with Koyano. And even he said, oh, God, what's important is that the Indians make a thing that contribute to the change, and we should concentrate on that. I make all this to say that Koyano have always been very balanced in dealing with these matters. And that kind of bad-mindedness that is reflected in PPP's behavior is anti-national at the highest level. It represents, in my view, a fascist tendency that has arisen in the PPP and is very dangerous to the country.
Yeah. Ogun, I'm very glad you raised that. You raised those issues that you've raised, that the silencing of Kwayana, the writing him out of history, has the largest significance in the context of today's politics, of part of the control and domination of Africans. Because one of the things you want to do when you dominate people is to write them. Remember what slavery did.
Every oppressor tries to write you out in history.
It's wiped our history. Our history began for them on the slave plantation.
Sure.
And in writing Kwayana's out of history is writing the African contribution to the nationalist movement out, writing it out. When you consider that Burnham, they've managed to make Burnham a demon among Indians. So when you write Burnham, you demonize Burnham, and you write Kwayana out, what is left? The Africans have no contribution at the leadership level in the nationalist movement. My brothers and sisters in the audience, this is very serious, and I want you all to take these things seriously. We are witnessing in real time a transformation or an attempt at realigning and transforming Guyanese society that if we do not stop it, it will take us 100 years and more to turn back if we allow it to be. This is extremely, extremely serious. There's another thing, OG, on that program. Vincent Alexander was also on that program. And Rafi Dev was there in Betaram Ramarak. And when Hamilton Green mentioned that Kwayana was not mentioned, neither Dev nor Ramarak commented. Neither of them expressed surprise. Neither of them said, what? No, man, you can't do that. They remain quiet.
Because there's a consolidated effort by Rafi Dev and some Indian rights activists, okay, who is pushing this project of Indian domination. And, when Rafi Dev first entered into the political affray, he brought some level of newness and he appeared to be objective. And I remember the discourse we have in WPA, on him. And so I remember in Ask Creole, in Agda, I was also active. We paid a lot of attention to Rafi politics, and Agda felt, he's been honest on the race thing, and that, there is elements of progressive signs on him. But people have also detecting in Rafi's politics a kind of racial, not triumphalism, that's not the right word. A kind of doctrinaire racial politics that was not the evolution of Guyanese political ethnic engagement. I remember myself and Rafi was on a program, that's early, and he questioned the WPA position on multiracialism, and WPA can't speak for Indians and so forth and so forth. And I made a concession to him that, okay, you may have a point, And I remember Brother Moses Bagwan, when we met, said, man, oh, gee, you shouldn't make no concession to Rafi. He said, Rafi, that what he's doing, he intervened in the situation and give the Indian ethnic justification to support the PPP. The Indian thing with PPP was Marxism, Leninism, and even though the ethnic thing was embedded into the situation, he provided ethnic ideology. And therefore, I should not consider, I said to Moses, that matter is better being fought by Indian activists in the WPA rather than me. I made this to point out that Rafi have evolved, unfortunately, in a very negative way, in my view. And I think it's also the judgment of the WPA. I think we're disappointed. I personally is disappointed because I spent a lot of time engaging Rafi, over time in the newspapers, with the hope that we're enhancing the political debate on ethnic issues and showing a kind of new political culture. We could disagree and could agree, and hoping that is leading to some accommodation in the future. But when Rafi, in this, have evolved the way he evolved, and then when the story with me about after the Buxton public meeting, and he wrote, that I say call on the security force to turn the guns on Indian people. I mean, that was the end of me and him. I can't see him anymore in any objective light. So I am not surprised. And early, I had the opportunity, and I hope I'm not digressing too far from what you're from. I had the opportunity. There was an Indian comrade, which I don't want, an Indian business person who was very close to WPA. I don't want to say much about him because I think people could work out who he is. And I don't know what is his business position and if he's vulnerable and so. But I remember we had a meeting at the Kitty Market Square. The PPP, I think, had already won the elections, or we were close to the elections. I can't remember exactly. But he came up to me.
You're talking about the 1992 election.
He came up to me. He said, "I want to tell you something. Look, I there among them Indian elements in New York. They don't know me politics. And I'm telling you, Jagoni know we get into, we sign on to with them elements." He said they're extremely racist. And he said Africans in Guyana are y'all here in Georgetown, Guyana, y'all in trouble. He said the PPP and Jagan doesn't know what they sign on to, And he was referring to elements like those because what have developed, according to him, is a set of them in New York who have become extremely racist. They got links with India. I want, some political forces in India, but more so, this seems to be influenced by the approach that the Jewish lab and the Jewish infrastructure behave in New York. And they seem to have copied a lot of the political approaches from those schools of thought. And he said, it's bad for Guyana, for business. And I have seen the evolution of it, So we're not up against something by accident, or we're not up against one leader in Jagdeo or in some other PPP leader got certain, weakness or misreading a situation. This is a comprehensive, approach with elements in the PPP and elements in the wider Indian community, business and otherwise, and diaspora, who have a design on Guyana and probably the Caribbean by extension. So you're up against something that is not the normal politics of your custom of the 70s or the 60s.
And you're so right, because we have been arguing that on this program. And I'm glad that you you are reinforcing it, because I want this audience to understand what we are dealing with. It's not just normal, electoral politics and political concourse of ideas and all of that. No, this is really serious. Serious. The underbelly is where the danger is. On that very program, Vincent Alexander, they were discussing how do we talk about Wisma. And they were talking about what Jagan called the Wisma massacre, the expulsion of Indians from Wisma in 1964. And they were not linking it to the Son Chapman incident that occurred weeks after. And they were talking about how do we deal with these issues. And Vincent Alexander said, well, he has to reach for Quayana's no guilty race. Quayana's thesis of no guilty race as a way of explaining our past. Now, here is Vincent Alexander, PNC man, on the program, right? Quayana fought against the PNC, but the PNC man is saying, look, acknowledging the role of Quayana. No, I'm not making a comparison, because it would be foolish to make a comparison between the PNC and the PPP or African and India based on that. But it's an empirical fact that on a program, Quayana is being written out of history, and two Indian brothers are silent on it. And a PNC man is on the program, along with Hamilton Green, trying to write Quayana into history. Comment on that.
You see, look, in this place we call Guyana, unfortunately, we haven't arrived at a point where political honesty, and I don't mean 100% honesty, because I'm never going to get 100% honesty, but I think a nation among its progressive elements has to arrive at some set of standards that will influence national behavior and that will be able to keep the nation together and to help us to move forward, particularly since we all were victims of European racism and colonialism and domination. And unfortunately, what we have been seeing in Guyana as time roll on is that we're having fewer and fewer politicians and political leaders. And unfortunately, a lot of them is of the younger generation, and I don't want to knock them because I'm an old man. But it is our generation and the older generation have failed us to a great extent, and we know the shortcomings, but they have led us to independence. They have given us something to work with. It is another generation that inherited the power, that had a duty to move us forward. And instead of moving us forward, it's moving us backward. And people like Vincent ourselves, we probably say we come in between. You know, we're not as old as the Quayanas and the Borland and the Jagan, and we're not as young as the Jagios and the others who have power now and so forth. And I think that in us, both individually and collectively, we still have some sense of fairness or some sense of Guyana being a nation with some sense of collective destiny. And I think that is what, you know, in some of these matters allow us to move beyond the politics of the past and some pettiness. And on these matters, we could take a more objective position. I mean, it is tragic that we're talking about things that is so should be so insignificant. I mean, you know, trying to write Quayana out in history, trying to treat Africans in a certain way at this point after 57 years of independence and so, a new leadership who say, you know, they bring in something new to the table. And I, as an old person, into politics by the age of 60, now 71, When I listen to them and they behave in the politics, it's worse than the Boredom and the Jagon days in a real profound way, because those who come after we benefit from the shortcomings of Boredom and Jagon. Some of them, some collectively, we're supposed to have a better education in all sense. Therefore, we should understand the word better. Some of them haven't engaged into the direct conflict of the 60s, the violence and the political tug of war. So you expect that they will bring to bear to the politics, some newness, but they're not seeing that. They're driving us further and further back, and they're carrying us to the brink. And this is what is dangerous in Guyana, and that is why my attitude on this matter is being shaped by the objective challenge we face and the time that we got to on our side to deal with these challenges. And we're going to probably deal with some things as we go along the program, but that's my response to the thing. I still believe that among those of us who engage in the struggle in a certain way, whether we for or against, some ideology, some belief or some belief system that was positive and nationalistic were involved. I think we're not dealing with people who are driven by that kind of ideology. We are dealing with people who are committed to ethnic domination, either in a regional way and probably international way. I don't know what is the source that driving them. And I want to shift into now. When I look at India,
it's your.
You see, when I look at India have always played. Burnham and the PNC have developed great relationship with the Indian Congress Party and the Gandhis and so. And India, at the official level, have never dangled in our politics and have played, a progressive role. When I watch at Africa, our neither Africa or India have really dangled our politics, influenced it one way or the other. And we have to, I've recognized that, and I'm trying to work out what change, even though the forces that came to power now in India, the ideology is openly Hindu, and they got conflict with the opposition party, the Congress Party, and they have developed some tactics that destroy Indians. I think it destroyed Indian democracy. It is promoting racism, in Indian ethnic thing. And I know some of the Indian folks are connected to that party. And while I can't blame the party of any overt negative intervention in Guyanese politics, I don't know what's happening quietly and secretly. Because something must externally be influencing, the Indian behavior of these elements. I don't know, but I made those observations to say that we enter something deeper,
Yes, yeah. And there is no doubt about that. And it is the kind of thing that we have to continue to probe for the benefit of our people. There are Indians in Guyana, Indian Guyanese, who subscribe to that kind of nationalist outlook, and it's not and I don't want people in the audience to think you're talking about a wishy-washy kind of nationalism. All right, it's a nationalism that is really deeply rooted in a human way. It's our shared humanity. The nationalism arose out of that rather than just a flag and a national anthem, because you have the flag and national anthem nationalism, but it's much deeper than that. I heard Michael Manley's daughter said when her father introduced democratic socialism and in Jamaica between 1972 and 80. and was able to deal with the question of poverty and the question of black people who did not enjoy a sense of purpose in their own country, which is 98% black. He said for the first time, he got a sense of what Jamaica was, that it wasn't the flag and the national anthem, is that our father was able to reach for the soul of the country. And that thing has stuck with me, all these decades, that there is a nationalism that is flag and anthem, but there is a nationalism that is about people's human worth, that even the Rastafarians, who generally take and recognize that Manley had introduced something new in the society. Go ahead.
You see, I try to be careful because, the effect of colonialism on the various groups in Guyana has been similar and different. And Africans who have been stripped of their culture, we're more susceptible, to European cultural and philosophical domination, because we don't bring to bear our indigenous philosophy and so in the equation. Indians are more lucky. In fact, I remember the activity was in Georgetown here. I think it was CLR James was there. Yes. And the Indian brother get up and he was, criticizing Africans in a certain way. And CLR James said, you're lucky that we come before you. If you come before we, you want to be talking what you're talking. Make the point that you're lucky because you don't get stripped of 250 years of your culture, your thing. So you probably, I make this point to show that, so we have these things to grapple with. And there is a lot of issues in the Indian community, like the African or the Amerindian communities, that as a nation we have to grapple with. But in grappling with it, it requires a level of honesty, and it has to be grappled by the best among us if we're not going to end up making a race, in extremely negative and destructive equation in our relations. And and that is the responsibility of activists and thinkers and leaders in all the ethnic communities. And in recent times there have been and I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to be unreasonable, but reasonable in recent times in Guyanese politics, with the rise of Indian economic domination and dominance, which is unprecedented. But no Guyanese can miss it. Comes with it a kind of Indian chauvinism, which is not being addressed by any constructive leadership in the Indian community. Now, it is said, I think it is correct, that Jagdeo have inspired a new breed of Indian business people and young Indians. I happen to overhear some of the discussions because I'm a market person and I line with the market every Saturday, keep contact with my comrades. And there are people that drive up the car and some of them got their own little discussions on politics. And I listen carefully to follow, the mentality, of young Indians to see, how we're developing. And so because I got a good sense of African development and all our limitations of our young people and so. And what struck me when it comes to some serious matters among themselves, they have no conscience. You don't see no social conscience, and this was dangerous. They will defend the right Indian to make money and to do it, and anyhow the state injustices and so, and all the concern is money, and they haven't seems to be developing any politics that line of march could be a destruction, it could be a ruination for all of us. And I know it's a factor. And it is, in a sense, a natural outcome of the Jagdeo approach and the PP approach to Guyana economy and politics. But there's no counter force. Like in our days, you had ASCREO. In the earlier days, you had the IPRA from the PPP, which is, engaging it in a way that could become a kind of counter force in helping to shape young Indians' views of the reality in a way that is much more balanced. I think that is totally absent in this equation. And to me, that's what is very disappointed, and it makes the situation extremely dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. And they're selling it, that thing that you have identified there. They're selling the rancid, aspect of that thing to some young Black people. First of all, it's not universal. They're choosing the young Black people. And then they're selling them not the real thing. It's like, you make pepper pot, and you eat out all the meat. And
I love the gravy.
Call it Sergeant in Buxton. Right? By Thursday, Friday, you go by Biloki. He said, buy this food here is only for stray by and thief, man. You gotta come Friday night when you want the red pepper pot. Because by Thursday is Sergeant. All the meat gone, you get pepper pot water. And that's what they're selling to Black people, the young Black people. But as selective, they're not even making it universal. It's Sergeant they're selling them. Come in.
You're quite right. And that is what, I mean, that's racism at a very low level.
Low level.
Low level. I mean, sometimes, David, honestly, I don't like to discuss too much these racial things in the present context, because, where you'll be sympathetic to the young people. That what the hand that is being dealt to them is such a dangerous hand.
Yeah.
And they're so unprepared to deal with it. And because of our age and experience, we know what they're playing with. And they doesn't even understand they're playing with their own destruction. And that is what drives me and drives the WPA, that in the context of everything, there needs to be an intervention that is so disruptive that it forced the country to recognize, look, we got to address some of these issues. And the party attitude as we go down is to fight for the constitutional reform. So by the time we reach the next elections, we should be fighting with a new constitution and some level of understanding that we're creating something different for the younger gen people in the context of oil and plenty. And in my own personal view, as an old political person, over 50 odd years in this struggle, I know the country, I know all the weakness, the strengths. But I also know that if this regeneration, me and you, well, you're a little younger than me, but if we don't do it now, and we pass it on to the younger generation, we will do the greatest disservice to Guyana as a nation, Africa as a nation. And we are at a juncture where we have to take the responsibility to what happened in Guyana in the next phase. And whatever is the price, whatever is the road we got to walk, it is worth walking and trying. If we fail, we fail. But history will record that we try.
Right.
We can't just surrender to it.
Yeah.
And this is a battle of will between our will and Jagdeo three-man party will. Yeah. The nation against the Jagdeo three-man party will. That is what was facing we. His behavior and their policy is destructive to the Indian community, as well as destructive to the African community, the entire nation. Now, we could see through some of these matters because we're long engaging with it. But imagine a young person who develop, as people say, within the Jagdeo generation. They all know Jagdeo and PP rule and so. Then they don't have an iota. Our Jagdeo and the tree, the party tree is driving them into.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, we have a short period to deal with this matter. Yeah. And Africans, whether we like it, the African community, its political, cultural, and leadership has to make up his mind that between now and the next elections, We change our dynamics of the political engagement, whatever is the price. That is how we can save Guyana. We can look after the African interests, and we're going to do a service to our Indian comrades and bring them back into something that all of we could be happy about.
Yeah. No, OG, you're so,
there is where we reach.
You're so correct about that. And I mean, you know, I'm from Buxton, and as a WPA man, you in a sense, you're a Buxtonian, because Buxton has always been the place that we consider to be liberated territory throughout. And there is a conversation that somebody like myself is constantly having. Not sometimes it's non-verbal. Is that you all socialize us in this village in a multiracial way. You all give us high African culture. You all give us political integrity. And we getting lashed now in we head. And we feel that there's a certain way we have to engage this thing. You know?
But the fight for African dignity, that doesn't reduce the fight, to reduce a fight for dignity, not even a fight for political power. It's a fight for dignity. I mean, and that shows how far we have degenerated as a country.
Yeah.
When our political system forced half of the population just to fight for the very human dignity.
Yeah.
It's a serious matter.
Yeah, no. And so you're correct. You know, I mean, it obtains in the rest of the country, I'm sure. Whenever you and I go to other parts of the country, we are confronted with the same thing. But because of Buxton is what it is, there's a way in which it comes at you straight in between the eye, because these are people that we have socialized over the last 50 years in a certain way. And they're really looking at you now and say, were you correct?
Right.
That's what I feel that when I talk to my villagers.
I have been grappling, because we in WPA, we encourage open discussion on racial issues. And we encourage our Indian comrades to raise any issue and thing. And so we always have a lot of tolerance on race issues. And it has been a continuous process. And in the process, we're trying to do our best to see how best we could provide some leadership in the context of this new reality, because as we said, we're dealing with the 70s and the 60s and the 80s. This is a new thing which nobody know. I don't think nobody could generally say they know the solution. Or nobody could say we genuinely know how best to save Guyana. We only got to go up on the experience, and we got to hope that, something fly and be optimistic. But the Indian question, okay, in the country and in the party has resurfaced. And the question we're grappling with, that over time the WPA have suffered, become almost like an African party, because you got more African activists than you got Indian activists. And the challenge that is before us requires the presence of Indian activists with the same kind of energies that we, the African activists, is engaging. And we don't have that at present. And it puts us, and by extension the country, at a disadvantage. Never before in the history of the party and the country, there have been that kind of exclusion of ethnic activists to this community. I'm telling you, at the height of the racial and political contestation between Burnham and Jagan and the PPP, it always permitted a level of access, okay, for WPA people and people generally to have the ears of the other side. I don't have the sense, I got a sense that in the Indian community we are being locked out. The domination factor and this external influence in Indian politics, and probably the rise of Indian economic success and whatever, have created a kind of blackout. I know the problems we have with the Indian consciousness as a result of Burnham and the rig elections and so. Those are real, as you said, they successfully demonized Burnham. But of course, Burnham and the PNC also contributed to the demonization of the process, but the PPP spent it very effectively. Just on rig elections, the only riggers in the country is the PNC and black people. And Indians know that they also engage in rigging, and I know they engage in rigging long before now. I know that on the Burnham, when Burnham used to rig elections, we know the people used to rig, and we told them we eye against it because we said they're rigging for thief back, get back votes that Burnham take from them. So the people have always developed a rigging machinery. They always had a very oil rigging machinery. We all know about it, but we told them we never really carried them through probably it's a mistake. We never carried them through the mill because we said it's compensatively rigging. You understand? And we live with it. But in so doing, we help to create in the Indian mind that the only riggers are African riggers.
Yeah.
So in a way, we have to be self-objective that, So I know that is a big deficiency in the Indian psyche, which benefits the PPP. But I'm not talking about that. I think we have gone over that. This thing, what I'm trying to think, is deeper than that.
It's deep.
Deeper than that.
It's a way in which they're socialized to see the other. I mean, they can't not know that you and me and other Africans in the WPA fought against our own. They can't not know that.
Know that.
and the normal human mind would say, well, at least we can't lock them out.
Right.
But there's a way in which they've just lumped all of us together and lock us out. So there is something that is going on there that is most profound.
Yeah. And I'm trying to, and I'm asking, and we're asking our Indian activists in the party to help us unravel these things. And we can't say we have fully unraveled it, but I say to the nation, so the nation must know that WPA is engaged in objective, interracial, examination of these critical matters. So it's not only Africans thing. We're trying to find and allow the Indian comrades to give you some enlightenment. That's exactly what is happening in the Indian community at the moment, and especially among the young, because the future of this is the African young and the Indian young. We know what's happening to the African young. Are we fighting it? We know how to. We think we have a sense over there. I'm not convinced we fully understand what's happening.
What's happening in the Indian community? OG, when Kedaki first started his morning program, and then I joined with this program, the trolls used to be PNC people who would come on and give you a hard time. Well, you all fight down Burnham and so on. That has gone now. It's young Indians, I assume, who would come on to this program, and the audience got to fight with them every day. They come on and creating mischief, for they're the trolls. So we started off this program.
But what I find interesting, they knowing that the command engage, but the level of engagement, the culture,
yes,
and the level of engagement is so backward and low and vulgar, and racist. Yeah. Which is tragic. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I hope I'm not over pressing the young people, but I don't know. I'm not inspired. I'm not inspired, but I think we have to be optimistic that each generation is finding a way of contribute positively to history and the culture and the country. And as much as I got problems with African young people, I got problems with Indian young people, we still got to, as the older generation, still got to have some sense that whether we like it or not, there's the future. Whether we like it or not, and we got to hope that we could do something that will help them to mitigate that future in a way, I'm serious, not even to save the nation, to save the self, because we're facing them is self-destruction. The nation destruction will come later, but they're gonna be distracted before their destructions we're facing them, and I don't think they sufficiently understand
Yeah.
You know,
Come on, go and see here tonight on WPA Groundings. I tell
we
you,
end up going away that we do plan.
expect to go down this road. But of course, when you know, activists who come out of a particular culture begin to talk, I mean, it's one of the things that we go places that we did not intend to. Quickly, Ogun say the WPA position was is that they're not contesting the local government election. You've been on the road, you've been quote unquote prosecuting that case, selling it to the Guyanese people why we should not participate in these elections, and the party called for what we call a day of African uprising and national resistance. Bring us up to date as to how the party is still thinking about that approach to the local government election.
Okay, first and foremost, the WPA campaign didn't start by targeting local government elections. The WPA campaign started as a conscious intervention by the WPA to address all the grievances that Africans have against the government and the PPP, and the PPP bullyism and domination and breaking up people's homes and the advantage. It was start deliberately to build African resistance to PPP domination. In the process of it, and the social political process, local government election become an issue. The government summons the nation to local government elections. And we took the position that, look, we know what is the objective of the PPP. We know the conditions that they've created for the local government elections, the control GCOM, the voters list, all the things that are shifting the advantage, the shift boundaries in George, in region 4 in Georgetown and so. So we know all these. So we said, look here, what the African community, the political, economic, and social and cultural leadership should do is to turn this local government elections against the PPP in a profound way. It's not a task simply for WPA. We provide the idea, we provide some amount of leadership and some resolution on the matter. But this is something we try to sell the African community, that this is the right and correct response to the PPP and Jack Dio. And we make it clear that this is not a fight against Indians. This is not an Indian-African fight. This is the African community against the party, the three-man party. That is we and them, you know. And we are still convinced that this offer African people, and we are operating in the context of the extended decade of Africans that the United Nations extend and ask the world to treat us in a certain way. And we calculate that all the international attention we could get as an African community in this period could play to the advantage. And what we should do as an African community is to use the 12th, okay, to make a political statement. And we want to make it clear all the time we talk about a political statement. Now, we can't tell the African community exactly how they must respond because we don't have that relationship with them that we talk down to them. And that's not the relationship we want to develop. Okay? So all the actors in the African community have a right to pursue this objective how they feel comfortable with it. Okay? But at the end of the day, what we want is we find some way that when people go back and look after the 12th of June, they saw that Africans bust the PPP bag and find a way of making a profound political statement that the history will record this was a major turning point in African engagement in the country. This is what we're interested in, a political statement. We don't care. Look, the PPP is trying to terrorize people and say we get into violence. And our position is we ignore them. You can't define we line of march. We and we people will define we line of march, and we people going to decide how they could engage. Whether they want to, the 6th, the 12th of June, get up and blow whistle, beat drum, whatever they want, they're going to do. You won't decide nothing here for me. Whatever form we people feel they're comfortable with, they're going to do and deliver. And at the end of the day, we want, when objectively is looked at in political terms, we could say Africans make a statement. And that is what this is what we will be after. And we're gonna pursue it to the end. We don't care whether they try to create tension in the society to frighten people. We don't control their behavior, but they are controlling the behavior. Because this here, as we say, is a fight, is a different fight. This is a fight for will. And if we lose the will to fight, are we talking about victory yet? You see, we get people that are confused. The WPA is clear. You can't get victory without a fight. And this is Jagdio telling me, but if he lock we up, we gonna walk back. And he bullying everybody. You know, he could bully WPA. We up against now a fight of will. We will against you will. You got your agenda for June 12th, and we feel offended because we believe you want to celebrate your rig elections, but June 30th is Walter Day. So apart from the national problems with me and you with this local government election, we got a partisan fight with you. Yeah, he passed Rodney, and yeah, he's passed the WP. And on this particular score, we carry it down to the battle, to the end. We argue. Our people will respond whatever way they choose. That's what you do in politics. You provide leadership, you provide ideas, but ultimately people respond how people feel comfortable with. And to the extent that they're able to make a political statement, is we got to interpret it and we got to give it life. And that is our approach. We don't care what they say. They could accuse me of violence, of breaking law, of promoting racial hysteria. They will always do that. If you were to listen to what the colonialist rulers were saying, we want to get independence. That everything you do is against the law. You know. So we, the WPA, is not caught up with that. And we don't believe that whatever we do, okay, we could live with whatever responses we get from the African community. Once it is a clear political response, that when we put it together and we analyze the situation, we could say we made a political statement that is important, that commit us to the next phase of the struggle, which is the constitutional reform struggle. And that to us is more important than this present local government elections. So that's our approach.
Takumo Gunse, one of the leading members of the WPA tonight, we're having a wide-ranging discussion and a frank discussion on where our country is and where it's going, ending there with the local government election. That is, that we want Black people, African people, to make a statement, to make a strong political statement. However you choose to make that political statement, we're not telling you how to do it, but you make a strong political statement on June 12th. It's not business as usual. In 2020, a lot of us believed that that election was a normal election. We learned later that the election was used as the forum for something much more profound. And we rather suspect that they're trying to do the same thing with June 12th. And we are saying, make your statement in whatever way you feel is the most effective way. But we must come out of the local government election stronger. On June 13th, we must be stronger than we were on June 12th. That's the message that comes from us here in the WPA. Takumo Gunse, you have the last word.
Okay, I know we wanted to say something on Mahdia.
Yeah.
The thing. Yeah. And I just want to say that the WPA members of the WPA have been asking the WPA executive to put out a statement. And we're working with it, but we I know we don't have much time, so I don't want to over elaborate, but we're trying to find an intervention which we feel is fitting to the tragedy. We don't want to simply do what most persons are doing. It's easy to to do that, but we feel it opened up the door for the party to alert the nation that we really have to relook the governance system in the country and how it is affecting our indigenous people. How have we really created an administrative and a governance system that could protect their fundamental interests? we have been looking at other statements, and one of the statements that come closest to our thinking is the GRA state, Guyana Human Rights Statements, which they raise the fundamental issues of the mining, effects on the community and these social problems. It is in the area of more profound responses we are looking at to make a statement, because we don't want to politicalize the thing, because it's a real tragedy. Young people, the person who set the fire, I mean, it's real tragic.
It's tragic, and we're going to do another program and allow the party to really discuss that issue in a more nuanced way than it is being discussed. Because yes, there is something about governance there. Yes, there is something about race there. And the Amerindians, I think, the Amerindian activists who have been trying to not touch the question of race, because they feel that the race thing is an Indian African thing. But what happened in Mahdia was not going to happen in a privileged area here on the coast.
Of course.
And so there is that element in it. And more profoundly is what are we socializing our young people in terms of conflict resolution?
Yeah.
Look at how Jack has a conflict with the WPA. They lock you up, chain your foot. What message are you sending to young people about conflict resolution? Don't believe that we as political people, that young people are not watching us. We think they because they vote for us and so on, we think that they're not really looking at us with an eagle eye. So there's much more to that thing, and we're going to come back and deal with it. I want to thank you, Brother Ogun, for coming on tonight. Really sterling and a deep discussion tonight. Thank you so much.
And thank you, viewers, for sharing the space with us.
Yes. And thank you, viewers. So it's the 5-man party versus the 3-man party. And we fighting this down to the end. We not, as I mentioned, when I walk Buxton, and for that matter, walk in any African community, I know there are people who are wanting to ask me, were you right? Were you right in criticizing the coalition government the way you did? Were you right in fighting Burnham the way you did? These are questions I am very conscious, me and the WPA are very conscious about. And that is why we are fighting so hard to ensure that we don't cross over to the other side. Because in many ways, we have socialized part of this community to see politics in a certain kind of way. And people have a right, young people who weren't present then, or some of them were little children in 1987, as we saw in that march. And they have a right to ask people like me and Ogun some serious questions. And we have to answer those questions. What are we going to tell them when they hear that Eyusikwayan is being written out of history? We have to confront some serious questions that are being asked verbally and non-verbally. So I want to thank you all for staying with me tonight. Tomorrow night, we're going to come back again for another edition of Politics 101. Love is always the watchword.
When we speak of civil liberties and civil rights, people are beginning to understand that the most fundamental of these is the right to work in our society. And what is occurring in Guyana is that the government is making political capital out of the indefensible position of one who is either unemployed or is very close to the line of being unemployed.
I want to say to you all in no uncertain terms that this government is disrespectful to black people. And if people disrespect you, you have a right to disrespect them.
I am saying now that we have started, now that we have come together, do not sleep. Don't let us go back quietly into the night. Protest must be the order of the day.